Dispatch to any available unit. Structure fire, family trapped.
Any unit at all. In rural America right now, this is happening. The phone rings, nobody answers, and the house burns down. Welcome to The Burning Oath, the channel that never looks away from the fire or from the people who fight it. Tonight we are going somewhere most people never think about, not to a city, not to a major department with 3,000 firefighters and a $300 million budget. We are going to the places in between. To the crossroads towns and the farm counties and the mountain hollows where the only fire protection that exists is a building full of volunteers who show up in their personal trucks at 3 in the morning because they love their community enough to trade their sleep.
10 years ago, we had 32 active members. Today, we're down to just 7. It's a struggle to keep our doors open.
And that nobody in power is paying nearly enough attention to what that means for the 100 million Americans who live outside the cities. This is The Last Volunteer. Stay with us.
The dual identity of the rural volunteer at rest.
Here is the thing that stops most people when they hear it for the first time. 82% of all fire departments in the United States are volunteer, or mostly volunteer. Not a few, not the rural exception, 82%. Of the roughly 29,000 fire departments in America, approximately 24,000 depend on volunteers. They protect 30% of the American population, about 100 million people, in the towns and counties and farm communities that the career fire service does not reach. And in 2020, the NFPA recorded the lowest number of volunteer firefighters since it began tracking the data in 1983. Not a slow year, the lowest ever. This is not a rural problem, this is an American problem, and it is getting worse every year. 60 members. That was the roster of a typical rural volunteer fire department in the 1970s and 1980s. 60 people who showed up for training, showed up for fundraisers, showed up for the 2 a.m. calls when the farmhouse down the road was burning. Today, the average small rural department has somewhere between 15 and 30 active members. And active means something different now than it did then. Active often means showed up for at least one call in the last year. In the worst cases, and there are real departments that match this description,
When I joined in 1975, we had a waiting list. People wanted to be here. Now I call and I get voicemail. I got 7 guys and half of them can't go interior anymore.
When the call drops at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, you get 2 people in personal trucks, and you hope it's a small fire. The number one question asked by every fire chief watching their roster shrink is, where did the volunteers go? The answer is not one thing. It is everything that has changed about American life since 1984. In 1960, 25% of households with children had 2 working parents. By 2016, that number was 66%. two-income households do not have the discretionary time that one-income households did. The evenings that used to belong to training and fundraisers now belong to dinner and kids' homework and collapsing into bed. Rural populations are aging and shrinking. Younger people leave for the cities. The people who stay are older, more likely to already be volunteers and approaching the age where they can no longer serve. And the job itself has gotten harder. Training requirements have increased. Calls are more complex, more medical calls, more technical rescues, more hazmat. The time commitment that used to be manageable has become a part-time job that pays nothing and costs everything. Here is the one that keeps rural fire chiefs awake at night. Not the overnight call at 2 a.m. Most departments can still cover that. It's 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. Tuesday morning at 10 a.m., every volunteer on the roster is at their day job, in a factory an hour away, in a school across the county, in a construction site with no cell service. Tuesday morning at 10 a.m., when a farmhouse catches fire and a grandmother who can't get out fast enough is inside, your department may get one person, maybe two, if you are lucky. This is the daytime coverage crisis. It is documented by every fire service researcher who has studied the volunteer decline. It is one of the most dangerous gaps in emergency services in the United States, and it is almost entirely invisible to the people who live and vote in the communities it affects. The National Fire Protection Association recommends that fire departments reach a structure fire within 4 minutes in urban areas. In rural areas, the standard acknowledges the geography and accepts longer response times, but research is clear about what every additional minute costs. For every minute a fire burns without suppression, it roughly doubles in size. At 5 minutes, a room fire can reach flashover, the point where every combustible surface in a room ignites simultaneously. At 10 minutes without suppression, a structure fire in a wood frame building can be beyond interior attack. In rural America, response times of 15, 20, 30 minutes are not rare. They are normal. In communities where the volunteer roster has collapsed and the nearest mutual aid partner is also volunteer and also understaffed, 40-minute response times to structure fires have been documented. 40 minutes. At that point, you are not fighting a fire, you are protecting what's left. Some departments have not merely declined, they have closed, the sign taken down, the equipment sold or transferred, the building handed back to the county or the township. When a volunteer fire department closes, the community it served does not disappear. The farms and the homes and the schools are still there. What disappears is the protection. Some of those communities are absorbed by neighboring departments that are also understaffed and now face additional territory. Some reach agreements with the county for coverage. At response times that make coverage a generous word for what is actually provided. And some communities find themselves in a situation that fire service researchers describe with a phrase that should alarm every American: unprotected. The membership crisis is compounded by an equipment crisis that runs alongside it. The average age of fire apparatus in rural volunteer departments is significantly older than in career departments. A career department replaces its frontline apparatus every 15 to 20 years. A rural volunteer department may be running an engine that is 30 or 35 years old, repaired and maintained by the volunteers themselves, kept running through sheer determination and mechanical ingenuity. A new fire engine costs between $600,000 and $800,000. A ladder truck can run $1.5 million for a department funded primarily by bingo nights and fish fries and a county line item that might be $40,000 a year. This equipment is essentially unreachable without grant funding. And the gear the firefighters wear inside the burning building, the turnout coat, the pants, the SCBA, all of it has an expiration date. Worn-out gear that has passed its rated service life is gear that does not protect the person inside it. When a rural fire department cannot respond to a call alone, it calls for mutual aid, neighboring departments sending resources to assist. Mutual aid is one of the most powerful and most effective systems in the American fire service. It works brilliantly when both parties are adequately staffed. Here is the problem nobody talks about. In rural America, the department asking for mutual aid is often understaffed, and the department answering the mutual aid call is also understaffed. You have two departments that each have 8 members trying to collectively do what one adequately staffed department with 16 members should do. And while those 8 members are at the mutual aid call across the county, their own community is unprotected. If a second call drops in their district while they are on mutual aid, there is nobody left. Mutual aid is the system that makes rural fire protection survivable. It is also the system that, when every department in a county is understaffed, becomes a mechanism for sharing the inadequacy rather than solving it. The data on rural fire deaths tells the story that the numbers don't fully communicate. Fire death rates in rural communities are significantly higher than in urban communities, in part because rural homes are more likely to be older, with older wiring and older heating systems. In part because rural homes are more isolated, giving fires more time to grow before anyone notices. In part because rural residents are less likely to have working smoke detectors. But also, inescapably, because when the fire is noticed and the call is made, the help takes longer to arrive, and those additional minutes cost lives. In 2019, the smallest communities, populations under 2,500, had the highest fire incident rates in America, 10.2 fires per 1,000 residents. The communities least equipped to fight fires are the ones having the most of them. This is not a coincidence. It is the convergence of poverty, age, isolation, and inadequate fire protection, all in the same places, all at the same time. Meet the people who are keeping rural fire protection alive by refusing to let it die. In departments across rural America, the people still showing up are older than they should have to be. 62, 67, 71, people who have been volunteers since the 1970s and have watched the roster shrink from 60 names to 8, and who still show up because, if they don't, nobody does. They are not naive about what this means. They know their knees are not what they were. They know they cannot go interior anymore, cannot wear the SCBA, and crawl through a burning building the way they did 30 years ago. They do the support roles, the water supply, the command functions. They make it possible for the few younger members to do the interior work. And they lie awake at night wondering who is going to do this when they can't anymore. There is a specific and remarkable sacrifice that happens in agricultural communities across rural America that almost nobody outside those communities knows about. Planting season, harvest season, the two periods in the year when a farmer's time is the most critical, the most irreplaceable. When a day's delay in getting seed in the ground or corn in the bin can cost thousands of dollars and represent a year's margin of profit. And when the pager goes off during planting season, when the tractor is midfield and the call is a structure fire with a person inside, the farmer volunteer stops the tractor, gets off, gets in his truck, and goes. He leaves the field, he leaves the planting, he goes to the fire, because his neighbor might be in the fire, and when he gets back to the field hours later, the planting window might have closed, the rain has come, the season has moved on. That is what it costs, that is what they pay, every time. In a career department, the fire chief manages an organization. He has a deputy chief for operations, a training officer, a safety officer, a mechanic, and administrative staff. In a rural volunteer department, the chief is usually all of those things, plus firefighter, recruiter, grant writer, fundraising organizer, equipment maintainer, and community liaison. The chief of a rural volunteer department works a full-time job, then comes home and spends evenings and weekends running the fire department as a second unpaid full-time job. When those chiefs burn out, and they do burn out, because what they are being asked to do is not sustainable. The department often does not have anyone ready to replace them. The chief, who has been holding everything together for 20 years, retires, and the department discovers that the infrastructure was the chief. And now the chief is gone. If the average age of rural volunteer firefighters is 50 plus, and the smallest departments have the highest percentage of members over 60, where is the next generation? Some of them are in the cities. The young people who grew up in small-town America, who went to college, and who built careers and lives in metropolitan areas, they are not coming back. Some of them are in the community but disengaged from the traditional institutions, like the fire department, the church, the civic club. That used to be the connective tissue of rural life. And some of them are right there in the community, working 2 jobs and raising kids and driving an hour each way to work. And the fire department has never once reached out to them in a way that acknowledged the reality of their lives. The next generation is not refusing to serve. In many cases, they have simply never been asked in the right way, at the right time, with the right understanding of what they can actually give. There are departments that have pulled back from the edge. And in many of the success stories, there is a person, often a woman, often someone who brought an outside perspective to an inside institution, who simply refused to let it fail. In Middlefield, Ohio, in Covington, Virginia, in countless unnamed crossroads communities, a new chief, or a determined member, or a county official, has rebuilt a depleted roster through relentless recruitment, creative thinking, and a willingness to change how the institution presents itself to the community. They used social media when the department had never had a social media presence. They held open houses. They went to the high school. They offered to work around the daytime coverage problem by partnering with businesses to allow employees to respond during work hours. They made the department a place people wanted to be. The solution to the volunteer crisis is not one thing. But in the places where it is being solved, the solution always starts with a person who decided the status quo was not acceptable. The National Volunteer Fire Council estimates that volunteer firefighters contribute approximately $46.9 billion per year in donated time and services to their communities. $46.9 billion donated, free, by people who work full-time jobs, raise families, maintain their own properties, and then show up in the middle of the night to drag a hose across someone else's yard. This donated service represents the difference between what rural fire protection costs if it is provided by career departments and what it actually costs these communities, because the volunteers absorb the labor cost themselves. The federal, state, and local governments that receive this subsidy have not, historically, been willing to invest proportionally in the infrastructure, equipment, training, recruitment support that allows the subsidy to continue. The volunteer fire service is the most extraordinary public-private partnership in American life, and it has been chronically undervalued by the institutions that depend on it most. The training requirements for firefighters have increased substantially over the past 30 years, and appropriately so. Fires in modern buildings are more dangerous, more complex, more chemically toxic. The equipment is more sophisticated. The regulatory requirements are more stringent. NFPA 1001 Firefighter 1 and 2 certification, the baseline for interior structural firefighting, requires approximately 150 to 200 hours of training. That is before any additional certifications, hazmat operations, emergency medical first response, vehicle extrication, swift water rescue. For a career firefighter, this training happens on the job, during paid working hours, with professional instructors and dedicated training facilities. For a rural volunteer, this training happens on evenings and weekends, at their own expense of time, in facilities that may be a converted barn and taught by an instructor who is also a volunteer doing the training in addition to everything else. The training burden is real, it is appropriate, and it is driving people away from departments that need them. Here is a consequence of the rural fire department collapse that hits homeowners directly, financially, and immediately. Insurance companies use ISO, the Insurance Services Office, ratings to assess fire protection quality in a community. The ISO rating system grades fire departments from 1, best, to 10, and homes in communities with lower-rated departments pay higher property insurance premiums. When a volunteer fire department's membership collapses and its response capability degrades, the ISO rating of the community it serves may decline. When the ISO rating declines, property insurance rates increase for every homeowner in the coverage area. And when a fire department closes entirely, the homes in its former coverage area often move to an ISO Class 10 rating if they are more than 5 road miles from the next nearest station. ISO Class 10 is the highest risk rating. Class 10 properties can see insurance premiums increase by 20 to 50%. The collapse of a volunteer fire department is not just an emergency services problem. It is a property tax problem. It is an insurance problem. It is an economic development problem. It is a reason businesses do not locate in certain rural areas. Here is why this crisis has been allowed to deepen for 40 years without adequate response. The communities most affected by the volunteer fire decline are rural. Rural communities are politically underrepresented at the state and federal level compared to urban and suburban areas. Rural voters are less likely to be reached by the national media narratives that drive political attention. The images of a volunteer fire department roster dropping from 60 to 8 do not produce the same political urgency as a wildfire visible from a freeway or a building collapse in a major city. And the firefighters themselves, the rural volunteers, are not a powerful political constituency. They are not organized the way career fire departments are. They do not have the union infrastructure that advocates for career fire service resources. The people who need the most help from the political system to solve this crisis are the people with the least political power to demand it. That is how the crisis has been allowed to compound for 40 years. There is a dimension of the volunteer fire crisis that is almost never discussed in public. The regulatory and compliance burden placed on volunteer departments that is designed for and calibrated to career departments. OSHA requirements, NFPA standards, EPA regulations for hazardous materials, record-keeping requirements, medical surveillance for members, background check requirements for volunteers who work with youth. Every one of these requirements has a legitimate purpose. Every one of them creates administrative work and compliance cost. For a career department with dedicated administrative staff and legal counsel, manageable. For a 7-person rural volunteer department where the chief already works a full-time job and handles administration in the evenings at his kitchen table, a different story. The regulatory framework that governs the fire service was not designed with the rural volunteer in mind. And small departments are spending their most limited resource, the volunteer time they have, on compliance activities rather than training, recruitment, and response. The federal government has a tool for this problem. It is called the SAFER Grant, Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response, administered by FEMA. SAFER grants provide funding to volunteer fire departments for recruitment and retention activities, stipends for volunteers during training, recruitment campaigns, equipment that incentivizes participation, digital outreach tools. They work. Departments that have successfully used SAFER grants report meaningful increases in their active volunteer rosters. In Sharon Hill, Pennsylvania, SAFER-funded in-station duty crew stipends led to a crew responding within 60 seconds and stopping a kitchen fire before it spread. 1 stipend, 1 rapid response, 1 house saved. The problem with SAFER is that it is time-limited, typically 3 to 4 years, and temporary funding produces temporary results. When the grant runs out, departments that have not built permanent retention infrastructure slide back. The solution is not to eliminate SAFER, it is to build on its success with permanent, sustained investment. One of the most pragmatic and increasingly common solutions to the rural volunteer crisis is the stipend, a modest payment per call or per training session that acknowledges the sacrifice without pretending to fully compensate it. In communities across America, volunteer fire departments are experimenting with $10, $15, $25 per call stipends. Not a salary, not career pay. A recognition that the farmer who leaves the field and the teacher who rushes out of the classroom deserve something more than a thank you. Research on stipends finds that they are effective at improving call response rates, particularly for daytime calls, and at retaining members who might otherwise leave the service over financial pressure. The objection: stipends cost money that small departments don't have. True. The answer to that objection: some of the SAFER grant funding is specifically eligible to support volunteer stipends during recruitment and retention initiatives. Federal money addressing a federal-scale problem. Some departments have found a solution to the daytime coverage crisis that is unconventional enough to raise eyebrows and effective enough to spread. Resident firefighter programs. Departments that offer housing, a room or an apartment in or adjacent to the fire station, to volunteers in exchange for in-station availability during certain hours. For a college student or a young adult just getting started, or someone who moves to a new community and needs affordable housing, a room at the fire station with a modest stipend and a place to live in exchange for being available during business hours is an attractive proposition. In New York, in Virginia, in departments across the country, resident volunteer programs have rebuilt daytime coverage that had completely collapsed. The cost? Renovating or adding living quarters to a station. The benefit? A firefighter who is actually at the station when the call drops at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. The departments that are most optimistic about the future are the ones that have invested in the future, not the future 10 years from now. The future that is currently 16 years old and in high school. Junior firefighter and cadet programs, where departments recruit high school students, provide fire service training at an age-appropriate level, and build the relationship between young people and the institution before those young people are old enough to make adult choices about where they live and what they do, are consistently identified as one of the most effective retention tools in the fire service. A student who spends 3 years as a cadet, who trains alongside the adults they will eventually serve with, who becomes part of the culture of the department before they even graduate high school. That student is statistically much more likely to stay in the community and join the department as an adult than a student who has never had any connection to it. You cannot recruit the next generation if you wait until they are 25. You build the pipeline when they are 16. The departments that are recruiting successfully in 2024 share something in common with every other successful recruitment operation in modern America. They are where the people they are trying to reach actually spend their time. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, text message campaigns with QR codes that link directly to an application, recruitment videos that show what it actually looks like to be a volunteer firefighter, not the traditional brochure image of a white male in full gear, but the real, diverse, community-connected reality of who volunteers are and what they do. The NVFC's MakeMeAFirefighter campaign provides departments with customizable digital recruitment tools free. The SAFER grant program specifically funds digital recruitment infrastructure. The departments that are reaching young people are the ones that decided to have the conversation in the places where young people are having conversations. The ones that are failing are the ones still relying on a sign outside the station and a notice in the monthly newsletter. In some areas of rural America, the solution to the volunteer crisis is consolidation. the merger of 2 or 3 struggling departments into one combined department with shared resources, shared equipment, and a combined membership that is stronger than any of the individual parts. Consolidation is rarely easy. Fire departments have deep community identities. The town of Millfield is not the same as the town of West Creek, and the Millfield Volunteer Fire Department is not the same as the West Creek Volunteer Fire Department, and anyone who says otherwise will hear about it at the next county commissioners meeting. But the departments that have consolidated, where the community identity concerns have been worked through, where the politics have been managed, often emerge with a more functional, better equipped, better staffed combined department than either predecessor had individually. The alternative, both departments slowly declining until neither can function. The math of merger versus the math of mutual collapse. Wondui. If you want to find the places where the rural fire crisis is most acute, go to Appalachia. The mountain communities of West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, Southwestern Virginia, and Western North Carolina face a combination of factors that makes the volunteer fire service challenge there uniquely severe. Population decline. Appalachian counties have some of the highest rates of population loss in America. The people leaving are disproportionately the young and working age, exactly the demographic the fire service needs. Poverty. Appalachian communities have low...
I've been with this department for 22 years now. Our county's lost 18% of its population since then. Half the folks my age have left, but I stayed.
Even with adequate staffing. When the staffing is inadequate, the mathematics of distance and time become even more consequential. And the housing stock. Older, more likely to have older wiring and heating systems, more likely to be manufactured homes that burn fast. Every risk factor for rural fire death concentrated in the same geography, and a volunteer fire service that is trying to stand against all of it with fewer people every year. In the Great Plains, the flat agricultural heartland of America, the volunteer fire challenge looks different, but is equally real. A volunteer fire district in rural Kansas or Nebraska might cover 200 to 400 square miles, with a community of 2,000 to 3,000 people scattered across that territory, the nearest neighboring department 20 to 30 miles away. The distances mean that even an adequately staffed department faces response times that are structurally long. When you are the only fire station in a 300 square mile area, and the fire...
When the pager goes off, I drive 12 miles to the station, pick up the engine, and drive to the scene. My fastest response to the farthest corner, 34 minutes. I know this, I show up anyway.
The department has enough members to respond when the call comes, whether the equipment works, and whether the community has invested in the fire protection system enough to maximize what a small number of dedicated volunteers can do. In rural New England, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, rural Massachusetts, and Connecticut, the volunteer fire service tradition is as old as the nation itself. Some of these departments have been operating continuously for over 150 years. But tradition is not a staffing plan, and in 2018 the chief of the Preston, Connecticut Fire Department reported that his personal chief's vehicle was the only unit to respond on 43 separate calls that year. Not the only fire unit, the only response vehicle of any kind. New England's volunteer fire departments are fighting the same demographic and economic forces as every other rural region, with the added layer that the region's very success, its attractiveness, has driven up housing costs in ways that are pushing out the working class and middle class residents who have historically formed the backbone of volunteer fire departments. When the local firefighter can no longer afford to live in the town he is protecting, the staffing crisis and the housing crisis are the same crisis. In the American West, the volunteer fire crisis intersects with the wildfire crisis in ways that create a compound emergency. The wildland-urban interface, the WUI, is the zone where rural development meets wildland vegetation, It is where more and more Americans are choosing to live, in homes in the forest, on the mountain, in the valley. And it is where wildfires do their most devastating damage to structures and communities. The volunteer fire departments that serve these communities are being asked to protect WUI structures, which requires specialized wildland firefighting training and equipment, while also handling structure fires and medical calls with shrinking rosters and aging equipment. And when the big wildfire comes, when the federal and state resources are mobilized and the hotshot crews and the air tankers are deployed, the local volunteer department is still there, still trying to protect the individual homes in their district, with whoever answered the pager. Rural's Wingo, Kentucky, Graves County, the southwestern corner of the state. The Wingo Volunteer Fire Department serves a rural district covering 175 square miles. Their budget, almost entirely from community donations. They needed new SCBA, self-contained breathing apparatus, the breathing equipment that keeps firefighters alive inside burning buildings. Their SCBA had expired its rated service life, the cost of replacement, beyond what the department could fund on its own. They applied for an AFG grant, the Assistance to Firefighters grant from FEMA. They won. They got the SCBA. The next year they applied for a SAFER grant and won that too. Wingo, Kentucky, population 600, has a volunteer fire department with functional rated equipment because someone in that department learned how to navigate the federal grant system and refused to accept that they were too small to qualify. In Warren County, North Carolina, the county recognized that its volunteer fire departments were in trouble and made a decision that not every county has the will to make. It invested not just in individual departments, but in the entire county fire service system. When the County Firefighters Association identified a need for updated portable and mobile radios across all 13 fire departments in the county,
Great news. We have been awarded a grant of $639,000 to upgrade Canadian infrastructure for all departments. This is a win for all of us.
Covering all 13 departments simultaneously. They won $639,000, 13 departments. Every department in Warren County got new radios that can communicate with each other, with county dispatch, with state and federal resources. One grant application, one county-wide solution. $639,000 that would have taken 13 individual applications, 13 individual grants, and a decade to achieve department by department. There is a specific type of story being told in rural volunteer fire departments across America, and it deserves to be told more loudly. A department in crisis, a roster at 8, equipment past service life, the last 2 chiefs burned out, and then a person in their early 30s who was asked to serve as chief because there was nobody else, and who turned the department around. Not through magic, through specific, practical, unglamorous work, social media recruitment, community events, high school outreach, SAFER grant applications, stipend implementation, housing for resident volunteers. Within 3 years, 15 active members. Within 5, 22. Not the 60 of 1985, but functional, capable, able to put a crew on the truck when the alarm sounds. These people are out there, in departments across rural America. They need support, resources, and a fire service infrastructure that is invested in helping them succeed. Let's be completely clear about what is at stake if the rural volunteer fire service continues to decline at its current pace. 100 million Americans, a third of the country, will have degraded or eliminated fire protection in their communities. Fire death rates in rural areas, already 3.5 times higher per capita than in protected urban areas for total structure loss, will increase. Property insurance rates in unprotected or inadequately protected rural areas will continue to rise, making rural home ownership more expensive and less accessible. Rural economic development will be further hampered by the fire protection gap that discourages business investment. And the communities that are already losing population to urban migration will have one more powerful reason for young people not to return. Their hometown is less safe than the city they went to. The volunteer fire service is not just an emergency service, it is a community institution. When it goes, something else goes with it. The community's belief that it can take care of itself. Before we close, we need to say the thing that this documentary exists to say. The rural volunteer firefighters still showing up, the ones who have been on the roster since 1978 and are still showing up in their 70s, the farmers who stopped the tractor, the teachers who asked the principal for permission to leave, the young people who joined because someone finally asked them in the right way. They are not keeping the rural fire service alive because someone pays them. They are not doing it because the institution provides them with comfortable working conditions or adequate equipment or public recognition proportional to what they give. They are doing it because the person down the road might need them. Because the community they grew up in deserves protection, because someone has to, and they decided it was going to be them. That level of commitment to community is not replaceable. It is not recreatable if it is allowed to die. It is one of the most extraordinary things in American civic life. And it is quietly disappearing while the country that depends on it pays almost no attention. The Last Volunteer. That is what this documentary is called. Not because the last one is imminent everywhere, not today, not this year, but because the trajectory is clear. 25% fewer volunteers since 1984. The lowest numbers ever recorded, a trend that continues downward while the population they protect continues upward. The rural volunteer fire service is not going to die tomorrow. It is going to slowly stop being able to do what it is supposed to do. Response times will get longer, rosters will get smaller, equipment will get older, departments will close one at a time in counties that most of the country has never heard of, until the coverage gap is so large that it cannot be ignored. But it doesn't have to go that way. The solutions exist. The programs work. The departments that are fighting back are winning their individual battles. What is needed is for enough people to pay enough attention to demand that this is treated as the national emergency it is, so that the tools that are already working can be deployed at the scale the problem requires. The rural volunteer is not the last in history, but without investment, without policy, without community commitment, she may be the last in her department. And that is a loss we cannot afford. If you live in a rural community and your local volunteer fire department is struggling, here is what you can do right now. First, show up, not just at emergencies, at the fundraisers, at the open houses, at the county commissioner meetings where the fire department budget is being discussed. The presence of community members at those meetings sends a message to elected officials about what the community values. Second, ask your employer to support volunteer firefighters on your staff. A formal policy that allows volunteer employees to respond to calls during work hours without penalty is one of the single most impactful things an employer can do for local fire protection. Third, consider volunteering yourself. If you are physically able to meet the training requirements, your community's fire department needs you more than you know. The website is at nvfc.org. The training takes time. The department needs the time you can give it. Fourth, vote for the people who treat this as the priority it is, at the county level, at the state level, at the federal level. This has been The Burning Oath, the channel that gives a voice to the fire service, its history, its heroes, its sacrifices, and the crises that are quietly unfolding while the rest of the country looks elsewhere. If this documentary moved you, share it, because the 100 million Americans protected by volunteer fire departments deserve to know what is happening to that protection. And because the people who can change this, legislators, employers, community members, need to know it too. Subscribe to The Burning Oath. New documentaries every week. Stories the fire service needs told. Stories you need to hear. Leave a comment. Tell us about the volunteer fire department in your community. Tell us if it is thriving. Tell us if it is struggling. We are listening. And to every rural volunteer firefighter watching this, we see you. We know what you sacrifice. We know the roster is smaller than it should be, and the equipment is older than it should be, and the recognition is less than you deserve. We are saying it out loud so that more people hear it. The oath isn't just taken once, it's kept every shift, every call, every 2 a.m. alarm by the last volunteers in America's smallest fire departments. We are fighting to make sure they are not the last.